Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. The title of this video is going to be Checkmate. And the reason I am titling it this is I wanted to talk about the possibility that if Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation decided to really, I would say, defeat NATO without probably even firing too many shots, right now would probably be the opportune time to do it, considering the force construct that we're seeing the Russian military move into the western area of operations, specifically towards Ukraine, Belarus, and just Western Russia in general. And of course, if the Russians were to enter any of the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania, it would trigger Article 5, where fellow NATO member states would have to respond, or that's what is said according to Article 5. An attack on one NATO member is an attack on all NATO members. But the reality is far, far different. And again, specifically when you look at the Baltics, again, kind of that hasty decision to allow the Baltic states to join NATO, while at the same time, a lot of these NATO member states have allowed their militaries to atrophy and not have the capability outside of huge amounts of United States deployments to Western Europe. And even that gets a little iffy and a little quirky too, because of the current political climate, both in the United States and in Western Europe. So again, if let's say the Russians move into, let's just say, all three Baltic states, it wouldn't really make sense for the Russians to just occupy Estonia and not continue into Latvia and Lithuania, as at some point we probably would see a uptick in NATO operations, and that would not be to the benefit of the Russians not to take those other states, as we could see heavy forces move into Latvia and Lithuania. So from just a strictly strategic viewpoint, it just makes sense for the Russians to take all three states. And the effort to take all three states would not be would not be too difficult. Again, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania don't have huge militaries, and the Russians could probably seize the Baltics within just a few days. And with that being said, again, Article 5 would be initiated, and you would expect that NATO would then respond, and that would require most likely a very large operation to attack towards Lithuania, and quite possibly a holding action near Kaliningrad, and then force its way up through Lithuania and up to Latvia and Estonia. And again, you look at the map. If the Russians occupied Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and it would be incredibly challenging from a military perspective to move all these forces. And again, you're invading the old Soviet Union, and that's what it would quickly become in terms of the occupying forces that would be moved into Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Now, the real issue is, again, that atrophy that has occurred within Western Europe. Even attacking or trying to liberate the Baltic states when NATO was much stronger than it is now. And what I'm talking about is at the end of the Cold War and after the end of the Cold War, where we saw East Germany, come back with Germany and become one united nation again. So the German army was much bigger. Right now, if you look at, for instance, we'll start with Poland. Poland probably, in terms of both warrior culture and a desire to fight, is probably higher than many European Western nations at this point. So again, the Polish army, about 60,000 personnel and about 800 tanks, about half of which, or I'm sorry, just probably about 250 are actually Leopard 2s. So the Polish use a German main battle tank called the Leopard 2. Probably most people know that who pay attention to military affairs. The Germans operate about 250 Leopard 2s as well. So the Polish operate just as many Leopard 2 tanks as the German armed forces. The German armed forces also contain about 60,000 personnel. Now, a lot of those are not combat personnel. The Germans have a few heavy brigades with about 200, 250 Leopard 2 main battle tanks. And we've heard reports because the German army is unionized, and there's crippling red tape and regulation within the German armed forces that prevent some of these armored vehicles even from operating. So again, the German army has atrophied to a point where the Poles have just as many German tanks as the actual Germans. And a lot of people don't even know that, but that's a simple fact. Another issue is France. France probably has the largest ground forces component of all NATO members with the exception of Turkey. So France has just over 100,000 personnel in its land forces. And again, it's that same issue in terms of its main battle tanks. France has about 200, 250 Leclerc main battle tanks. The United Arab Emirates, the UAE, actually operates more French Leclerc main battle tanks than France does. So again, you're talking about France with 100,000 personnel. Again, a lot of the French units are in these light infantry units. They've done the kind of the same thing in terms of their heavy brigades that Germany, England has done as well. The Poles still have quite a bit of heavy forces. They have 800 tanks. They include T-72, PT-91s, which are Polish upgraded main battle tanks, and then obviously the German Leopard 2. So then you have to look at the desire to actually operationally fight and decide that your nation state is going to go to war against Russia. So given that Germany has let its military atrophy, and we have to look at capability, we have to look at the capability of Poland, the capability of Germany, the capability of France, and then we have to look at more specifically the desire of Germany, the desire of France, the desire of the United Kingdom to build up forces in Poland and then prosecute a war against Russia in the Baltics. Would they do that? My opinion is they wouldn't. And I think it would be both a political opinion, because the political opinion, the political motivation to get into a high-intensity war with Russia, where in all probability, if that happens, Berlin is going to get hit. Berlin is going to take cruise missile strikes. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, they are going to get Iskandered. They're going to get hit, as would Warsaw and quite possibly even Paris. If Paris got into it, Russia does have some long-range cruise missiles where they could hit Paris. So again, is the political will there? And I would say, at least for Germany, definitely not. I would say for the Turks, absolutely not. So that leaves Poland and quite possibly France, and maybe England. It's difficult to say. Would they then build up forces into Poland and operate against Russia in the Baltics? Would the Germans allow the use of German bases to be used in a war against Russia, even if the Germans decided to set this out and not be part of NATO anymore? That's a question that is very valid, and you have to ask. And those are the political dynamics of this. You then have to look at the actual military capability. And the military capability for Poland, with some reinforcements from the from France and the United Kingdom, is going to be very, very difficult to launch an operation into the Baltic. So again, you're looking at excluding the United States. The United States would probably get into it if that decision was made. But then therein lies the problem of moving these forces into Poland. It's going to take quite a long time. This is not going to something that's going to happen in weeks. This is going to take months. The United States is going to have to train up. We haven't been doing a lot of multi-heavy brigade operations in the United States. Most of the training operations we do are small company and battalion-sized operations, training operations. So again, if you don't use that skill set, it starts to atrophy and you have to get it back. And that's going to take time. And that's one thing, unfortunately, NATO would not have, because the Russians would continue to mobilize, would continue quite possibly to prosecute the war, depending on how intense it became. But more importantly, they would continue to mobilize and strengthen their position in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, making it very, very difficult for any force to invade the Baltics, which would now be occupied by the Russian Federation. So again, and then Germany comes into the equation again. Unless the German government is overthrown and a more center-right government comes into power that it has a desire to fight the Russians. But again, that is very, very doubtful. So the question is how do you move these forces that would be moving into France, the Netherlands, and Belgium? How would you get them from Netherlands, Belgium, and France into Poland? It would be very, very risky to come up and go into the Baltic Sea, because as these large roll-on, roll-off cargo ships are approaching ports such as Gdansk and other ports in all likelihood Western Poland to offload this heavy equipment, they would get attacked and engaged by long-range anti-ship systems and aircraft coming out of Kaliningrad and now what is the occupied Baltic states. And that would cause, obviously, escalation as well in terms of the possible seizure of Gotland and other areas as well. So again, very, very challenging scenario. And so if you're not offloading ships directly into Poland, then and Germany is not allowing armored vehicles to be offloaded in German soil to be used in a NATO operation, because again, I just do not believe Germany has the wherewithal to do it. So how are you getting those forces from France, Belgium, Netherlands into Poland? Well, maybe you're coming all the way around through Italy, Slovenia, Hungary, Slovakia, and into Poland. I mean, that's crazy supply lines right there. So again, very, very difficult. And again, a lot of this is predicated on Germany. It's kind of the core of NATO, and it's not there. And even let's say hypothetically the Germans suddenly decide to get into this operation. Well, it would make things easier on the United States to transport forces from the continental United States to Germany and France and Netherlands and Belgium, and we could do a possible proper reforger, but that's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of resources, and it would give the Russians again a lot of time to build up and be able to defend Kaliningrad and the Baltic states from basically the liberation of the Baltic states. So, and then you have to look at the German army, as I just talked about, 60,000 personnel, a unionized military that, quite frankly, could disagree with military operations and go on strike. It's possible. It's unionized. And then you look at the amount of tanks that the Germans currently have active. I mean, they don't have large stockpiles of Leopard 2s because they've given a lot of their Leopard 2s to the likes of Poland and Turkey and Greece and other states all over the world. They've sold all their equipment. So how are the Germans going to create this military that simply doesn't exist to create a force, move into Poland, and then liberate the Baltics? They can't. Now, with that being said, really the only positive is really NATO air power. But again, that's going to be challenging. Obviously, I have I would say reduced expectations on Russian air defense systems. But no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and NATO is going to have probably fairly significant air losses as it tries to operate over the Baltics. And a lot of air bases are also going to get hit by Russian ballistic missile systems. So again, and a lot of bases, command and control, supply depots are going to get hit by these Russian cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. There's going to be ships being sunk by Russian naval assets, specifically nuclear attack boats and diesel-electric submarines. So again, I mean, you're asking for something, one, that militarily right now doesn't exist outside of a major reforger by the United States, and that's going to take months. And then you have to look at the actual invasion of the Baltics, the reinvasion of the Baltics to liberate the Baltics against a fully mobilized Russian military. And we saw the most powerful. Again, it was a long time ago, yes, but it still happened. We've seen the most powerful military on the planet, the German army of 1941, wear itself out against the Russians and eventually completely destroyed. And again, most of the combat power that the German army was facing was against the Russians. And the vast majority of the combat power the Russians were facing was from the Germans. The Allies, when they landed in Normandy, were probably facing about 20%, if not less, of total German combat power, whereas the Soviets were facing probably in excess of 70-80% of total German combat power. So history repeats itself, and unfortunately for NATO, it's atrophied. I just don't think it has both the political will nor the military capability outside of a prolonged air campaign that may not work against the Baltic states. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Have a great day, everybody.